Welcome to Riding the Trauma Train, or welcome back if we've shared this space before. I'm Lydia, your host and fellow passenger in this journey of self-healing, inner strength and personal growth. This podcast is a safe, judgment-free space dedicated to the realities of living with and healing from trauma. Through personal stories and in-depth conversations with special guests, including therapists, healers, practitioners, and fellow survivors, we look at what healing can truly look like in everyday life. We explore realistic healing journeys and share simple, sustainable practices and actionable tools to support your well-being along the way. So grab your ticket, take a seat, and remember, you are not on this journey alone. Welcome to Riding the Trauma Train. I'm Lydia, your host and fellow passenger in this journey towards self-healing, inner strength and personal growth. Today, I am joined by Emily Edwards, who is a neurodivergent coach, and her website is With Insight Coaching. And Emily will be discussing her late ADHD diagnosis and how she can help us move forward with our own neurodivergencies. I think that's probably how you say it. If I don't, you might have to correct me. Grab your ticket, take a seat, and remember you are not on this journey alone. Emily, welcome to Riding the Trauma Train.
Hello, Lydia. It's nice to be here.
I found you, or I discovered you, as it were, through my friend Caroline Milne. She was doing some menopause type ADHD neurodivergent posts on Instagram. And then another friend said, my friend up the road has been diagnosed with autism and ADHD. I was like, okay, let's see who Emily is. I've had a look at your page and I think it's amazing. Like with Insight Coaching, like insight is something that we all need. Tell me about Emily and how did this all come about?
Well, I'm going to start with the name of my business, actually, because that's kind of just where you were. And I've always enjoyed playing with words a little bit, if I'm completely honest. And so the word with insight is kind of got like a bit of a double meaning. So as you've just kind of expressed, the insight bit is part of it. So with insight, and a lot of my work is about people being reconnected with their own inner resources and with their own inner insight that comes from within. But also it could be about something being within sight, like a goal, an outcome, something that somebody wants to work towards. And I think that the two expressions of the word in my business with insight kind of expresses quite nicely sometimes those two edges that people are navigating in life, whether they're wanting to reconnect with that inner resource piece or whether it's because there's a thing that they need to do and they need some kind of support in getting there. So yes, that is a little bit more about my business name. But yeah, you're right. I am a late diagnosed autistic ADHD, and that came about following my daughter's assessment, probably when she was in year 5, I think. It's been a while now, and we're a military family, so we've moved a lot, so my brain gets very scrambled. But I think that she was probably it was before year 5. It was when she was actually 5, and she's now 12. And I'm not good at maths, so how long ago is that? 8 years?
7 years.
7 years? Yeah. 7 years.
I'll go with 7.
Let's go with 7. And if anybody's listening and is a lot better at maths than me, please don't call me out on that because I'll feel a huge amount of shame because numbers isn't my thing. So yeah, it was through her process actually of being assessed alongside where I was in my personal and professional life at that time that I started kind of going, I used to do that when I was a kid. Oh, that sounds like me, you know? So it was through supporting her in that journey that I started to discover my own needs as well. And so I was diagnosed about 3 years ago or so now. So I was 37 at the time. I'm now 40. So yes, it's been a wild ride.
What were the things that you noticed then that as an adult you were doing that maybe were similar to what you were doing as a child? Or what kind of come up for you? Or could somebody recognize that now?
So what was very interesting to me was that at the time that this was going on for my daughter, I was working as a forest school leader because I'm also a qualified forest school leader, and I was working a lot outside all year round with children of all ages and very varied needs. And actually, that was one of the happiest times in work for me as an adult. Being outside in nature is just the most regulating thing for me. I love being outside, and that was my childhood. I spent all of my time playing outside as a child, my grandma and granddad lived just up the road and they lived on a farm. And so I was really, really lucky that a lot of my time outside of school was in a very safe, kind of open outdoor space where I could just play and be in my own little imaginative world. And I think that actually doing my forest school qualification and moving into that work was like the best tonic for me in terms of my sensory needs and also regulating my nervous system. And I think it was that experience in particular of going, oh my goodness, like I really need to move and I really need to be outside and I need lots of freedom. It was that kind of made me go, isn't that interesting? I'd forgotten that I needed all those things that I used to do as a child quite instinctively. So it was that really made me think, isn't that curious?
Yeah. Do you also think that because you did have that experience or you had that opportunity to go and do that, that might have, if your system was being regulated by doing that, that it was almost start of the masking because you're not being exposed to the closeness of being around busy people or the fact that you were already regulating without knowing it.
Yeah,
Does that make
absolutely.
sense?
Yeah, makes sense. It makes sense because I was providing opportunities for young people to regulate essentially and take risks, get things wrong and be creative, to make things, to play by doing. And because I was facilitating those experiences, I was also doing those things as well, because that's what forest schools, a lot of forest school is about, modeling it out to people. So you're doing it at the same time as sharing that experience with somebody else. So yes, definitely. Like the fact that I could go to work in outdoorsy clothes, which is very much me, that are nice and baggy, nice and soft, lots of layers, that just enabled me just to be myself. I didn't have to wear clothes that made me feel awful with scratchy labels or that didn't feel like myself. Like I felt that I could really take my authentic self into my forest school practice. And so I got the best of me and other people got hopefully the best of me as well. And I think that it paid dividends in terms of my mental health and my well-being at that time. So yeah, that was the key. That was the cornerstone really of me starting to realize that I was neurodivergent. And a lot of the children that were also neurodivergent or waiting to be assessed or maybe had experienced some childhood trauma or maybe were looked after were always gravitating towards me as well. And I always used to think, oh, isn't this interesting? But of course now that makes absolute sense too.
Yeah, and it's also an energy thing, isn't it? If it's you do gravitate towards people that kind of are on the same wavelength as you. That's probably where wavelength comes into it. I think what to go down that road and to notice that about yourself is really, really interesting. And for anybody listening that thinks some of these traits, what would you say to them? What would be the process you would say to kind of go down? Either to be diagnosed or like with your coaching, you've got, I keep reading this, it keeps popping up at me called clean language.
Mhm.
So we'll talk a bit about that shortly. But what would you say to somebody who was on the cusp and thinking, I think I might be neurodivergent. I think I may have this or something like this. What's the road they can take?
Wow, that's a massive question, especially
Mm,
at this time in the world where there's a lot of things that are going very pear-shaped in terms of systems of support for
mhm.
people that might need some extra support and resources with regards to disability or neurodivergence, either or. And I think it's kind of a loaded question because there are so many people already on waiting lists. And one of the things that I've
Oh.
talked about recently a lot when I've been going out to do speaking events is we're in a situation where there's a huge bottleneck. We've got all these people, hundreds of thousands of people, and more besides that may not already be on a list somewhere, but may not want to be on a list either as well. That's quite
Mm,
important to acknowledge that. And it's really hard because there is a lack of resources, and that's causing this kind of massive squeeze and huge amounts of pressure, both on the people that are waiting, but also the resources that are there to support them to get them through the assessment. So I think one of the things that, something like coaching can offer and therapy as well, but coaching, I don't think often gets talked about anywhere near as enough
mm.
as it could do with regards to this particular piece, because I think that coaching is really, really well placed to support people at exactly that point that you've just mentioned. And mainly because not everybody wants to go through the assessment process for various different
Yeah.
reasons. And it may not always be the right time for people to go through that process either. Um, the reason is, and I think this speaks a lot to kind of your interest around trauma, is that, when you go through an assessment process and if you do receive a diagnosis, what happens next can be massive in terms of identity, unpacking stuff, seeing things through different lenses, particular experiences that you might remember, memories. It can bring a lot up for people. So I think that this question needs to be managed really carefully for that reason as well. Like, it's not going to be the right time for everybody to do it when they're thinking about it, and having access to support and resources to be supported to go through the process, but also at the other end of that is key. And I was really, really fortunate that I do have solid family members that were there for me after the fact, that were willing to, speak to me about things and help me remember stuff and all the rest of it. But not everybody has access to that level of support and
Mhm.
resources. And I think that that is a really, really important thing to consider. And I've now forgotten the question, so you're going to need to ask me again, because I feel like I've gone off on one.
No, it's fine. It was about if they feel that they're on the cusp of
Mm.
having some kind of neurodivergence, how can they go down? Well, I think like I think hit the nail on the head. The fact that there are no resources, but if you are somebody that feels strongly about
Mm.
being assessed, then go down that route and get yourself on a waiting list. But likewise, we've got like your with Insight or with Insight, like both of them, your coaching services as somebody with lived experience and professional background is another way forward. But I also think that self-awareness is the first step. I
Absolutely.
think that's I'm just going by what you're saying, and actually we know ourselves better than anybody,
Yeah.
and we are the people that need to move forward. But then the support networks will be things like your coaching services and the NHS. And I like you say, it's bottlenecking at the moment, and there is a lot going on. Um, but if you're somebody that feels that they need that, then taking the first step, I suppose, is the way forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously, like, speak to your GP, there is the right to choose pathway, things are still changing a lot within the system, and that's not really my area of expertise. But, if you've got a friend, colleague, there's somebody that that has recently gone through the process, see if they'd be willing to speak to you to see what their experience has been like, and if you have got access to funding to be able to do it privately, that's always an option as well. But
Mm,
I think, like, look really carefully, even if you're going down the right to choose route, or even if you're going privately, look really carefully around the practitioner and the clinician or whoever it is that's going to be doing the assessments, because I think that as as with anything in life, they need to be the right fit. Lots of people talk
mhm,
to me about masking, and lots of parents and carers actually talk to me about masking in children, and how sometimes they feel like things have been missed. So, look for somebody who does have, like, if you were going to go and have a surgery, I always think about what the vet said to us about our old dog. She had really bad knees and had to have 2 surgeries on her knees. And our vet friend said to us, like, you need a surgeon who's done that particular operation,
mhm,
hundreds of times, that knows it in and out. If you apply that kind of same principle to looking for somebody to support you through your assessment process, like, if you're a woman, for example, you might want to have a woman who's your practitioner, who knows more about what it might be like for women. Or, masking, look for somebody who's done a lot of CPD around masking. Those kinds of things, I think, are really important in terms of you getting the best experience that you can have, because it can be such a huge life transforming thing going through an assessment process and getting a diagnosis. And I think that, for me anyway, those subtle details can make a massive difference in terms of how I feel supported and acknowledged and seen going through a process, as much as being in the process itself.
mhm,
So they're just some things that come to mind. But, coaching is a really useful way, as you say, to get to know yourself. And that's what
mm,
I think coaching can offer people is, yes, we know ourselves best. And it's also true that sometimes we actually have no idea how we work. And
yeah,
that's what I think coaching is really useful for, is actually starting to do some of that self-awareness, self-understanding piece, which then can inform an assessment process if you choose to go down that road. And you don't, it's really important to say as well, like, you don't need a diagnosis to receive reasonable adjustments, whether you're in an education setting, whether you're in a workplace, that is not necessary. That setting should be making adjustments regardless. And yeah, does that help in terms of having a few
Yeah,
thoughts?
no, absolutely. I think because we are lucky that we are in a world where things are moving forward, and there are, I don't know, because more and more people are getting diagnosed, or the awareness around the fact that things have maybe been missed when we were children, or maybe we're even a bit more accepting now than what we were 20 years ago. I think it's really important that people reach out, because if you're somebody that is getting lost within yourself
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know what's going on, like speaking to somebody like you is going to be eye-opening and more, I don't know, because I think I read on your website that you take their language, whoever you speak to, you take their language and you work with them to kind of get to what that means, I suppose. So talk to me a little bit about, because you do quite a lot of different stuff, don't you? You do like training for schools and workplaces and things like that, and you do parent carers, and you do individual. So tell me a bit about your coaching then. Let's dive right into that.
Okay, so yeah, clean language is really interesting. I absolutely love it. It's completely changed my life, and that's why I'm really passionate about using this approach now with other people. So I've worked one-to-one, receiving clean coaching, clean therapy. I've worked within a clean team as well. And the clean of it doesn't mean that we're like not swearing. It actually means that you're really paying attention to not putting your own bias, judgment, assumptions on somebody else's stuff, essentially. So you're not contaminating that person's experience. And it's just therefore a really, really beautiful way of honoring that person exactly as they are in that moment, and you're kind of with them in their world. You're not interpreting what they're saying. You're not making meaning of what you're saying. You're just using their words, their gestures, their nonverbals to reflect back to them so that they can do their own self-inquiry and their own self-discovery. And I think that for neurodivergent people who are later diagnosed or are querying whether they might be neurodivergent later in life, I think it's such an affirming process to go through. Because so, anyone, how often do we have the opportunity these days to really be heard in that way?
Mm.
How often do we have somebody who's paying really exquisite attention and really creating that safe space and the sense of belonging that we can really kind of go, okay, I am really curious about myself. And so that's what it's about. My coaching with me is not about me, in a process with another person so that I can understand your stuff. You're in a process with me so that you can understand your stuff. That's the difference. And I think that's really important as well in terms of like the power dynamic. Like this process with clean language is really, really about people having autonomy. And again, if you
Mhm.
think about neurodivergent people who've been masking for a very long period of time, who have been gaslit, who have been told they're wrong, they've been labelled as lazy or messy or noisy or too much or all that, it's such an amazing way for a person to get a sense of their own self agency and to have choice. And that in itself can be quite transformational as well. So that's a little bit of a sense of what clean language is about. And it's easier to do it than it is to talk about it. So I don't know if you feel like you want to have a little go, but we could do a little snippet if you want so people can hear a
Go
little
on
bit of like
then,
what
let's
it's
have
like. Okay.
yes, please.
Okay, so just to preface this, but this isn't necessarily how it would work in a coaching situation, because obviously in a coaching situation, I'm contracting with somebody to work to an outcome. What we're going to do here is a bit of the kind of what's called symbolic modeling. So it's just like modeling out your experience, just because it's a useful thing to do here on a podcast, but it's just going to be very short. So just 2 or 3 minutes or something like that, if that sounds
Yeah,
okay.
that's brilliant.
Okay, so Lydia, when you're working at your best, you're like what?
Organised.
Organized. What kind of organized?
I don't get stressed and things are right in their place.
Not stressed and things are in their place. Anything else about organized like that?
Yes, I've created lists and My mind is not in tatters from being pulled from left to right.
You've created lists and your mind's not in tatters. And so when you're organised like that, whereabouts is that organised?
It's on paper, and when it's down on paper, it's then organised in my head.
So it's on paper. Once it's on the paper, it's organised in your head. So what happens just before it's on paper?
I would probably have a bit of a meltdown.
Probably have a bit of a meltdown just before,
Yes.
and then it's on paper.
Yes.
What happens just before the meltdown?
I get overwhelmed.
Get overwhelmed. Where does that overwhelm come from?
Every part of my body and my head.
Every part of your body and your head. Okay. So every part of your body and your head, overwhelmed, meltdown, and then it's on paper.
Yes.
What's important to you about it being on paper?
I can see that it's organised.
Mm-hmm. You can see that it's organised. What kind of see is that see?
That is that everything that I want to accomplish is written down. Everything that I have accomplished is crossed off.
Mm-hmm. Written down, accomplished, and crossed off. And so when it's on that piece of paper like that in a list, whereabouts is that piece of paper?
It's in a folder and it's either on my studio desk or my dining table.
Okay. Folder, studio desk, or dining room table. And so once it's on paper in a list, you're accomplished or crossed off in your folder and you're organised, then what happens?
I have a sense of relief and I'm calm
Sense of relief. Whereabouts is that relief?
everywhere.
Everywhere.
It's like a weight's lifted.
A weight's lifted. Does it have a size or a shape? That relief everywhere?
I would say it's like a cloud that's lifted.
Mm.
So it's almost like the organized inside is chaos, and then it's like when it's down on paper, it's lifted off of me like in a puff of smoke.
So organised chaos to a puff of smoke, a weight that's lifted.
Yeah.
And so when that weight's lifted and there's relief and calm, what happens next?
I'm happy.
Then you're happy. Okay. Then that's probably a good place to stop.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's kind of a little bit of an insight into what it's a little bit like.
It's actually very relaxing listening to your words being replayed back to you and kind of unpicking your own thought process. I love it. I think it's really interesting, and I think it's also interesting for people that do think they're not like I'm getting the word out neurodivergent, because it is their thoughts, it is their thought processes, and it is the scrambledness that's going on inside that actually it just slows it down and makes you think, okay, what does A mean? Okay, then what does AB mean? What does ABC mean? Brilliant, absolutely brilliant,
Yeah.
and I love it.
So
And
that's the key.
Go on.
Like you're thinking, what's the A mean? What's the B mean? Like that I'm not saying, oh, a list. Is it on yellow post-it note or, like on a blue piece of paper, or what kind of pen are you using? Like any of that internal stuff that might be happening for me, any assumptions that I might be making or any inferences that I might be making, that I'm just keeping that all nice and parked, because what's most important is that you're doing exactly what you've just described. It's slowing it down.
Mhm.
You're doing your own unpacking for you to get curious about you. That is the point.
Yeah, that's really good, and I think anybody that's listening, obviously they've just had a little insight into my disorganization. They've also been able to, that it almost felt like a mini kind of, I don't know, like a mini calming session, just doing that back and forth questioning. It was really like comforting. So yeah, I'm intrigued about that. I'll
Yeah.
have a little look at that later.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this concept of clean is keeping everything kind of neutral. Can you tell me, you've got something called clean space? What is clean space? Because
I love clean space. Thank you so much for this question, because I think it's a really amazing way of working. So can I use the example that you just shared a little bit about to talk about it?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
when you were describing putting something on a list on a piece of paper, in essence, what you're doing there is taking that kind of the chaos and putting it into space. You're taking it out of your system and putting it into space on that piece of paper. So whereabouts was that piece of paper?
On the dining room table.
On the dining room table. So there we are. It's in a space on a piece of paper on your dining room table. And so in clean space, what we're doing is exactly that. So you take a topic or a theme and you take it out of your system, you write it down on a piece of paper and you put it where it needs to be. And then what we do is work spatially. So like right now, we're both just sat on a chair staring at a screen. But if we were in person, it can be done online, but if we were in person, we would be using the space around us to be part of the facilitative process. So you would be tapping into your inner wisdom by engaging with the space around you. And you might know different things about your topic or your theme in different places. Suddenly, being on the threshold of a door, for example, can get new meaning, or standing looking out of the window in the sunshine can have a new meaning, or if you're outside, a tree or a leaf or a bird or something becomes part of what you're doing. So spatially, you're working in a different way because insights, things emerge in response to what's happening in the space, not just the process of, verbally just talking it out as we just did in our little example. And I love using clean space, and it's particularly sometimes quite helpful for those people who do get stuck in their heads quite a lot. So I experience kind of getting stuck in my head when I am a bit overwhelmed and I've got too many things, I've got too many tabs open. And actually you can't see them, but I've got quite a lot of post-it notes on my desk because I sometimes have to work spatially in order to A, get it out of my head, and then B, to be able to make sense of it. So for me, prioritizing is something that I find really difficult, because to me, everything's got the same level of priority. So one of the ways that I support myself with that is a bit of a clean space activity, which is, right, get it out of my head, one thing per post-it note. The closest things to me on my desk are the ones that are urgent, and then the ones that are getting further and further away are least important. So then when I'm done, I would scrunch that piece of paper up and chuck it on the floor, because that gives me a nice little dopamine hit and a bit of a yeah. So that's a very, very small kind of, putting post-it notes in a space, but I could actually get up and move myself and ask myself, like, well, okay, what do I know here? And actually by getting up and moving your body and embodying the experience as well, that can help people that tend to get in a loop or stuck, a bit unstuck.
That's it's quite somatic as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because it's you're kind of jolting different energies whilst you're moving. So
Yeah.
I also think I know we've been talking a lot about neurodivergent, oh my gosh, why can't I say it today? Neurodivergency. But I think a lot of what you're saying can be really related to people that have been through trauma. So the brain space and the being triggered by things, like to be able to work through them. Especially, I had a lady on here. She was Dr. Tracy Evans. She's a neuroscientist. Say it then, and she was saying that for somebody that has been through a trauma, that gets later diagnosed with ADHD, it may be that the trauma was masking the ADHD kind of signals. Like you may have always had ADHD, but you didn't know about it because you've already got this kind of trauma blanket on that you're working through. But I think there are a lot of things that a lot of practices that can be put into play for both kind of symptoms, I suppose. Symptoms, I don't know if symptoms is the right word, but expressions of that. Rather, I don't think symptoms are the right word, but yeah, so expressions of your autism or your ADHD or the trauma, the complex PTSD, like they all kind of marry up. You can kind of like depict them, can't you? And there is no one thing. It's very confusing to say.
And the beauty of this work is that, so David Grove was the guy who created Clean Language back in the 80s. And a lot of his work, he was a counselling psychologist, and a lot of his work, early work, was with veterans from the Vietnamese War. So a lot of this work is very naturally trauma informed because of how it was created and where it came from.
Mhm.
And that's why it's so important. The clean part is so important because it's, not contaminating somebody else's stuff with your own. It's kind of delineating and separating out those two things. And that's really, really important. But David's work actually came from working with people's own symbols and metaphors, and actually being able to relate to your own experience through a symbol or a metaphor. We all use metaphors every day, by
Riding
relating.
the trauma
Yeah,
metaphor.
exactly. Yeah. And so the metaphors and the symbols that we generate actually can be a way for us to work with our stuff without working with the stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so having a different way to relate to it or to perceive it can be quite a useful part of the process. So absolutely. And the embodied bit of it has been actually one of the most significantly transformational pieces of this work for me personally, because our bodies know things. And actually when you were talking about your organized, you started gesturing with your hand, I noticed, and I can't see too much of it because of the way that the screen's set up.
Camera set up.
Yeah. But people's bodies tell you things as well. Like they'll often gesture into a space where they're seeing something or that kind of a thing. So, intuitively, our whole mind-body systems are engaged when we're using this kind of an approach. And I think that what makes it so useful for neurodivergent people or for any human being, because we're all sensory beings. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and I'm still learning stuff every day. That's what I love about the work as well, is that there's always something new.
I also love the fact that if I think about it from a trauma perspective, that clean language, if you're relaying back to somebody that actually it's their words for one, and two, you're not using a trigger word. Like there are so many different words that people that have been through different kinds of trauma, big T things and little T things as they're now being called, but actually using that clean language means that it's their word, and I think that would be very empowering to somebody who needed to talk about something. And you're absolutely right. There is a space for talk therapy, and it can be absolutely imperative to somebody's healing journey. But there is a power kind of struggle there. There is, you talk at me, I give you a solution, and that's not where we're at anymore. We are at a place where you need to be on the same playing field or on the same level as somebody. I'm doing the metaphors now, aren't I? On the same level as somebody and be able to talk like a normal human being, because I may be in a room, I may be with a therapist or a counselor, and they may have all the knowledge from books in the world, but if they haven't got lived experience, they are not going to know what I've been through or what, I don't know, Maisie Jane's been through. So having that kind of clean language, and that is almost like a reflective balance bounce forward. And yeah, I think it's really, really empowering. Anybody that's listening that can relate to that, I think it would be worth having a look into it, because some people may not be aware of it. I wasn't until I started reading up about your coaching business. The other thing I want to touch on is it's almost like one of the buzzwords at the moment, which is masking. What is masking, and how can you describe it to somebody that, obviously we all know what a mask is, but what is masking in
Ooh.
relation to
Ooh,
neurodivergent?
you're asking me such
Sorry,
big
big
questions.
questions.
You're asking me big questions. And actually, as I'm talking to you, I'm going to try and open a slide deck, because there's a beautiful, beautiful quote that I would like to share if I can find it.
You said about the body remembers everything,
Mm.
and there's a book by Bessel van der Kolk, which is The Body Keeps the Score. I was just intrigued to see if that was going to be where the quote was from.
It's not actually, but I have been listening to that book. I love listening to books these days. I have been listening to that book. I've not gotten through all of it yet, but it is really, really interesting. Have you read it yourself?
I started listening as well, and I've also not got through it. I've been listening to that one, Mel Robbins, Let Them, um, Atomic Habits. I've literally got like 5 different books on the go, as well as doing your podcast.
Yeah. So I I think what we've got to start with is that everybody's experience of masking is going to be completely different and unique. So my experience of it might be different to yours and to the next person. And all humans will do this to some degree. But I think that the important thing around masking and neurodivergence is that the cost that it has on that to that person is huge in terms of their energy, their cognitive capacity, their well-being, their mental health. And over a long-term period, there are now stats that show us that long-term masking does have real dire consequences in terms of mental health. So it's really important to be aware of it. But the difficulty is that masking can both be conscious and unconscious. So sometimes people don't always realize they're doing it. And I've certainly experienced that many, many times. So I know now that I have a pattern of people pleasing. And I love saying yes to people. And that means that I've had to do lots and lots of personal development work around that, because what happens for me, even now still actually, is that I will have said yes when I mean no and not realize until much further down the line. And then I'm like, I've got this really odd, uncomfortable feeling in my body. And I now know that those body signals and sensations are a very specific signal. And it's often a bit of a red flag. Something's happened that you don't yet know that you've been masking about, and it's going to bite you on the bum.
Okay.
So that's one of my experiences of kind of like the unconscious stuff, and it still happens, but it's often when I've squashed myself and when I've not been able to express something, or I don't know, it's hard to describe it. It's easier for me to describe things often when they're happening in the moment, but it's often a sense of not fully being able to express naturally in my own unique way, or to have said something, or if I feel there's been a misunderstanding and I've not dealt with it right there in the moment and I hold on to it, it's often later down the line that I realize and think, oh yeah, I can see now that I was masking, but I didn't know I was doing it at the time, because it's still so unconscious, and so that awareness isn't sort of fully at the front of my mind. So this quote that I'm going to say now comes from Dr. Devon Price, and the book is Unmasking Autism. It's an incredible book. I really recommend it. I took it on holiday with me one year and devoured it very, very quickly. I adore this book, and it's great. So it says, masking is the act of hiding one's true self, often out of fear of rejection or because of a desire to blend in. For autistic people, this can mean suppressing stims, forcing eye contact, mimicking social behaviours, and essentially performing a role that is exhausting and unsustainable. And I think that just
Wow,
sums
that
it
is
up. That just sums it up.
very powerful.
Really powerful. And, I think one of the key difficulties and challenges for me as a late diagnosed autistic ADHD is that there has been so many years where I have been doing that, where I've been masking and hiding my true self purely because I did not know who I was.
Yeah.
We started at the beginning, sort of like, how did I come to realize? And it was through my daughter's own journey, but I have always had this intense feeling of just being very weird and different to other people, and feeling very like the odd one out and all sorts of things. And, it makes sense now. It makes sense. But had I have known, I would not have been doing those things, because I would have known. I would have known me.
Yeah. And I suppose you would have also learned to move forward with, well, you wouldn't have been as much of a people pleaser. You would have chosen when to be a people pleaser rather than just being automatic.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that so much. I have something where I overshare and I go, and it's literally, I walk away thinking, oh, I really didn't want to say that today. I didn't want to tell that person that, or yeah. So I can relate to that kind of side of things.
Yeah.
And people pleasing, there are quite a lot of us, and I think the neurodivergence and trauma survivors of trauma, we are very in the depths of acceptance. I think we're trying to be accepted for who we are, yet if we haven't worked through who we are, we don't know ourselves yet.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Exactly. And like, where are our edges? Because I think for me, like, often people have said to me, oh, you need better boundaries. It's like, oh, that's bloody brilliant advice. Thanks. Great. But if I don't know where my edges are, how do I know actually how do I know how to instate my own boundaries? And so for me, like, it's been a huge, like, oh my goodness moment of like, I haven't been able to support myself and to protect myself in many ways with boundaries, for example, because I had not realized that that was a thing, because I've spent my whole life, being so afraid not to fit in, or being rejected and stuff like that, that I was just doing what everybody else did, not realizing that I had autonomy, not realizing that I had a
Yeah.
choice. And like that, that might, as if you're listening and you're thinking, well, that's really obvious. How did you not know that? Like that is masking. That is it.
Yeah.
And that has been huge for me, and it's really impacted many, many different areas of my life. And it is still something that I have to work on. It is still something that is an active piece of my development. And actually, I say this so many times to people, but like, if people don't know how they work, if they don't know that they can have autonomy, how can they actually help themselves? People are told all the time,
Mm.
oh, you need to take better care of yourself, or go and do some self-care, or, we have all these little bits of advice from people. But actually, if you don't know yourself well enough to know what to do, then it's a really tricky position to be in. So I think that piece around awareness is so, so important, because that's what it can give you. It can give you that sense of self, of actually this is my boundary, or this is how I mask. I need to be a bit more aware of that. I actually had to stop a conversation recently. I was in a conversation with somebody, and I realized mid-conversation, when they were asking me certain questions, I was like, actually, I'm starting to begin to feel a bit uncomfortable about where this conversation's going. And in the moment, I was able to go, the context of this conversation wasn't very clear at the beginning. So I just had to stop the conversation and be like, I just need to check, like, what is the intention behind those questions? Because I'm getting this really weird signal in my body. And I was completely honest like this. I use these kinds of words, like getting this signal in my body that lets me know that I'm uncomfortable with something. And I feel like I've perhaps just overstepped my own boundaries without realizing that I've done it. So I need you to clarify now where this conversation's going, so that I have a choice about whether I want to continue speaking about this or not. And like, that was brave for me. That was,
Literally, that's how I'm like,
yeah, it was so,
I can feel this whole body
yeah,
reaction.
absolutely. It was super, super brave. But I didn't know what else to do other than talk my process out loud. And I've realized that actually, for me, talking my process out loud like that is so important for me, one, to be able to hear myself acknowledge it to myself, but also for the other person to hear me. And it was a bit risky, because I wasn't sure, and I couldn't have predicted what that other person's response was going to be. But the alarm bells that were going off in my body let me know that it was worth taking the risk, and that I needed to do something to support myself in that moment. And that's all I'd got. But that self-advocacy comes from understanding yourself and trusting yourself enough that you can speak up for yourself when it matters. And
Yeah.
that is the bit that I'm really passionate about in my work, is giving people, an opportunity to understand themselves, to understand how they work, so they can advocate in a way that helps them to be at their best more of the time.
I love that. And like you say, I literally, whilst you were saying that you stopped, I have been that person that has been like in my head going, Lydia, shut up, Lydia, shut up, Lydia, you don't want to say that. And so I can, oh my gosh, I can 5,000% relate to that. And I think it's also really important, if you are a person that doesn't know yourself at the moment, or you're confused with different bits of your identity, that you do put yourself in a place where you can work through that, and work through that in a supported, safe place, so that you do end up getting confidence and being your authentic self. I know that that's being shouted about from the treetops at the moment, but it's so true. Being the person that you want to be. If you are walking through life, we're going to call it masking, or what, we've got a cape on, invisibility cloak, for goodness sake, like Harry Potter. But if that is the case, then we're never going to move forward in ourselves, are we? Because we're not going to know what our next step is. And when you were talking then, the thing that came up in my head was a picture of a dot to dot. So like, we are the person, we are the page of dot to dots, but having the coaching there helps us join them up so that we can get to the picture that we want. Another metaphor
Another
for you.
metaphor. You're on a roll now. I love it. You're not going to be able to stop seeing and hearing them everywhere.
Yes. I'll go pick up a Dr. Don.
Yeah.
I'll just draw myself.
And I think that there's something else that I talk about quite a bit as well in relation to my work. It's that, it's a great thing to empower people. And that's why I absolutely adore doing the coaching. But one of the things that I'm really aware of in terms of, especially when it comes down to workplace coaching, where I'm coaching somebody as a form of support in their workplace, in their work, is that it's a two-way process. It has to be a two-way process. Absolutely, that person needs that level of one-to-one support. I'm not denying that at all. But oftentimes the employer, the manager, and this could also relate to a person and their partner, or, a family or friend related kind of context as well. But it has to happen in a two-way street, because otherwise you've got, a person who's starting to join those dots up, but another person looking on going, what the hell are they up to? I can't see for the life of me what that picture is going to turn out to be. But if we also provide support to that other person, whether it be a manager, a workplace, a friend, a partner, whoever, then they can also start to go, okay, what lets me know that that person's now put their Harry Potter cloak on? Because then they are also learning about how to calibrate that person's needs. And I think that is that's a whole other podcast episode, but I think that's really, really important. And I hear that a lot from parents and carers who are supporting young neurodivergent people. It's like, well, how can I get attuned to this? How can I calibrate against their needs as well? And I think that it's that person learning about their own needs, yes, and it's about the people around them also being able to recognize and get on board with the things that enable them to be at their best more of the time. Because otherwise you end up with this kind of uncomfortable dynamic of, well, this person's doing a lot to support themselves, they're getting all this new awareness, and they're feeling empowered and they're starting to advocate for themselves. But if that's landing in a space where it's not responded to, or it's not acknowledged or heard or acted upon or taken seriously, then that causes further problems. So it has to be a two-way process.
Yeah, you need the support there as well whilst you're working on yourself. Yeah, that's a really important point to make, actually, because with all the will in the world, if you're doing everything just by yourself, you're not gonna. Other people need to understand that what you're doing as well is you're moving forward, because they're going to see changes in you. And that may cause further conflict down the line. It may not, but if somebody is aware of what you're going through, or aware of what you're doing, then obviously they can find ways that they can support you. Can we talk a little bit about, so obviously it was Caroline that kind of made me aware of you, and Caroline's been on and we've done a menopause episode. So I know, I'm literally looking at your website now, and you've got two beautiful circles with neurodiversity, hormones, and then lots and lots of words in between. And the word stimming has come up, and I don't know what that word is. So that's my first question. And then my second question is, can you tell me a little bit about the correlation between the two, and how I love the way you've done two circles together. Oh, that literally went two circles together with the intersection of those words. So one, what is stimming? And two, tell me about the interaction between them.
Okay, so stimming, and I said the word stim as well in that little quote that I read out just before. So stimming is basically self-stimulating behavior. Lots of neurodivergent people, especially autistics and ADHDers, will do this. So it's self-stimulating behavior, often in forms of movement, sound, that is basically giving us sensory input as a way to regulate our nervous systems. So for example, like I often with a pen will sit and do something a bit like that, jiggle it between my fingers and just enjoy the sensation of it tapping a particular rhythm or pace between my fingers. I shake my foot quite a lot. In the gym, between my sets, I'm often doing things like this with my fingers, like tapping my fingers to the beat of the sounds in my ears from my music. My daughter used to love swinging her arm round and round and round, and nicknamed it the windmill, because that just felt super good for her. There's lots of other things, like she also makes lots of vocal stims, so just weird noises, like that just for her light her system up. So it's these kinds of things, self-stimulating behaviors, that actually help neurodivergent people to regulate their own nervous systems. And the reason that it's included in that image that you're mentioning, where you can see the intersection between neurodiversity and hormones, is because when a neurodivergent person is experiencing hormonal fluctuations, it might mean that they're needing to do more of that in order to regulate their system because it's become a little bit wibbly wobbly. Or it might be that for some reason they're not able to do as much of that, which means they're not as regulated, which could cause some kind of an impact, i.e., they're not as regulated, and everybody's different, but they might be more irritable. For example, they might be a bit more snappy, and they might not have the opportunity to go and do what they need to do. So they've got lots of pent up energy or frustration. And the way that that is seen and heard by other people could then be assumed to mean a certain thing. So if somebody's vocalizing more, if somebody's needing to move more, if they're fidgeting more, the perception, let's just take a workplace context, is that, oh, that person's worse, or their symptoms are worse, their traits are worse, things are getting, more difficult for them because they're doing more of that. And that is an assumption. But actually, that person might be working really hard to try and keep themselves regulated at a time when there's quite a lot physiologically that's out of their control. So does that help in terms of the stimming?
Yes, absolutely. And self-stimulation and stimming, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and lots of people do that in different ways. And I guess there could be, other, let's call it more socially acceptable, and that's in quote marks for anybody that's not seeing me, ways of doing it. So, for example, somebody who uses the gym as a way to self-stimulate, so lifting heavy weights, really going hard on a cardio kind of thing, could be, my daughter used to take herself out of the classroom. She used to say that she was going to the toilet. So that would be like the socially acceptable excuse. So she's getting out of a busy environment and she's going to go and hang off the coat pegs because she wants to feel the resistance and her own body weight pulling through her joints and her arms. So there's lots of ways that it can happen. And sometimes they're not always as obvious as others. And some of us will integrate those things that actually work really well to self-stimulate our system in those kinds of ways as well.
Okay, that's really interesting, because what works for one person may not work. And I see a lot of people, I know a lot of personal friends that tap. They tap, and it could be a pen, it could be a finger, it could be a cup. But yeah, actually, it's just getting that kind of energy away from you so that you kind of can come back to your own calm. I think that we need to, it's self-regulating, isn't it? Like, something's going on in your body, so you need to expel that energy that's built up.
Yeah.
So by tapping, or by, like, your daughter hanging, I actually, as soon as you said that and you described her hanging, I felt the kind of pull in my, because I love the sensation of stretching. And I think that most of us do, unless we've got some kind of ailment. But it is a lovely sensation, and it brings your body back to you. Yeah, absolutely love that.
So to pick up on that then, like, that's linked with sensory processing, which I think is another one of the words in the center of that image that you've just described. And so this is related to sensory processing. So if we just take the hanging off the coat pegs example, and that feeling of the stretch and the resistance coming through your muscles, tendons, joints, that's our proprioception. So that's the part of our body that is linked with developing the awareness of body awareness, but it's that kinesthetic feedback that we get through our muscles when we're actively engaged in some kind of physical activity. So that stretch, the feeling of lifting a heavy weight, that feeling of tiredness after you've run or sprinted really quickly over a short period of time, that's our proprioception, and it's extremely organizing for our systems. So yeah. So in terms of sensory processing, you mentioned that, you personally really like that. I've got a friend who really hates that. So she's extremely sensitive to that particular signal in her body, which makes it really hard for her to do any level of strenuous activity. So, and that is quite common for neurodivergent people to have a sensory profile that's either hypersensitive, so oversensitive, or undersensitive. So what happens when you have a hypersensitive system is that you are more sensitive to something. So for example, my friend who does not like that sensation is oversensitive to it. So to her, the signal of the stretch, for example, is super loud and overbearing. Whereas for you and I, who really enjoy that sensation, we might be a bit undersensitive, so hyposensitive. So we might seek out much more of that input because we know that actually that makes us feel really good. And that can be true for the other sensory processing systems as well. And interoception is one of those that is often not talked about, but that's our sensory processing system that helps us to interpret, to notice and interpret our own body signals and sensations. So it's kind of like grumbly belly plus a particular kind of empty feeling equals hungry. It's our interoception that enables us to notice those signals, but also to make meaning of them as well. So that's another really common system for neurodivergent people that can be different. And especially in perimenopause, if you're already somebody who really struggles to notice your signals and to make meaning of them, when your hormones start to fluctuate and change rapidly, what you know about yourself then changes, and then you have to relearn almost what these new signs and signals mean for you to then make sense of your new experience. And that might change. For me, my hormones, when they change, it can be from 1 hour to the next or day to day. It makes things a little bit more difficult to predict. So then that has an impact on executive function, which is another one of those ones in the middle, which is like time management, planning, prioritizing, being able to like predict into the future what's going to happen next, being able to self-evaluate. Those kinds of things are all our executive function, being able to make decisions. So if you think about things like brain fog, decision fatigue, like just losing track of time, dropping tasks off lists when they're right there in front of your face, those things start to change when your hormones start to change as well. And you asked me about the particular connection between neurodivergence and hormones. When I did the online webinar with Caroline around understanding that particular connection, one of the things that I found from some recent research, I think it was last year or this, I can't remember, but it said that basically executive functions decline at times in reduced estrogen. So if you think for ADHDers, especially, the times of your cycle when your estrogen naturally declines, your executive function will be declining with it. So it's kind of like a double whammy. And if you think about perimenopause, when all of those hormones, not just the estrogen, obviously, but the others start to change as well and become much more unpredictable, you're then faced with an already unpredictable system in terms of executive function, especially if you haven't got a handle on it and if you've not got support resources and strategies that really enable you with those things, then you're into really weird territory. If things start changing even more and fluctuating even more, it's therefore quite a common period of a person's life when they go, oh my God, maybe I've got ADHD, because suddenly that's the bit that shifted. They're often the kind of traits that you would see before anything else, like forgetting things, brain fog, decision fatigue, can't make decisions. Trying to think of some of the other ones that people have shared with Caroline and I recently. But yeah, they're the kind of things that show up as some of those first line things that start to change.
Yeah, and I think it's also, as a woman, it's also important. Like, we go through hormonal changes every month.
Mm-hmm.
And we hit perimenopause, and that's like a massive change. And I've got an episode where I've recorded with a lady who was diagnosed with PMDD, which is another extreme version of hormonal change. So, and she has also self-diagnosed with ADHD. So she has literally said that, well, one, listening to this episode for her is going to be beneficial because of moving forward with those two kind of elements.
Yeah.
But I think hormones is something that we need to we can't really get a grip on it, but we need to kind of learn how to move forward with them and how we can try and balance them, especially if we're somebody that thinks we're going through a neurodivergent journey as well. Like, there are it's like two different coaches on the same track.
Yes, yeah. And I'm not going to be able to put my hands on it right now. And my working memory in terms of executive function, that's another one of our executive functions. And my working memory is really, really poor. So I'm not going to be able to, on the spot, pull this stat out in an accurate way. But I will tell you anyway, because I think it's really pertinent to what you've just brought up. But I think only 4% of the population, the general population, experience PMDD, whereas for ADHD, it's about 92%. Yeah. So I will drag out that information and I'll send it across to you. I want to make sure that I've got that right. It's something like that, but it's staggering. And so it's such a no-brainer that we need to be more aware of this connection between neurodiversity and hormones, because it really, PMDD really impacts people's mental health in a huge way. I think there's lots of evidence around suicide with regards to PMDD and neurodivergence generally anyway, but I think that having awareness on how these things can be impacting and layering up for a person, if you think about the different layers that we've mentioned of neurodivergent experience just in the last hour, and how that could be kind of adding up in terms of that person's mental health, it's really, really huge. And so much of that is hidden because one, people aren't aware of it themselves, let alone anybody else. And two, it's not spoken about. There's still a huge amount of stigma and shame around these topics, and we really need to be creating safe, non-judgmental spaces like this where people can learn. And that's one of the things that I want to do through group coaching, is kind of create, community so that people have the opportunity to talk about these things and to learn together and to share their experience and to be with the differences between us, so that they get to know themselves and other people's experiences a bit better as a way to help them navigate life.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's the same with doing the workplace. And when you say that you do the parent carer workshops, I think knowledge is power, knowledge is key. And if you're somebody that is going through something, whether that is something to do with neurodivergence, trauma, hormones, having somebody to support you is just going to help you get to where you want to be in a safer and judgment-free space. I'm pleased you just mentioned that, because it is true. And we are in a world where, as much as we are being given a lot more awareness of lots of things, there are still stigmas, and we're still battling through. And it's going to be some time until there's some kind of answer for all of that, but then something else will come up. Can I just ask, where can people find you if they want to work with you, either through employers, individuals, or even partners or groups, like you just said?
Yeah. So the best place to find out more about me and the work that I do is on my website, which is withinsightcoaching.co.uk. I do run a monthly get-together for neurodivergent people in and around Salisbury, which happens on the first Tuesday of the month at Everyman Cinema. We're there between 7 and 9. It's a really wonderful, inclusive kind of space. The staff at Everyman are amazing. That we always have the music turned down in our room and sometimes outside in the hall as well. So it's kind of a bit of a low demand environment in terms of sensory stuff. I've always got lots of sensory toys, and there's a huge age range. It's really wonderful that we've got people of different age ranges. So you could come along to that if you want to meet me and to make social connections with other neurodivergent people. And you can work with me online if you want to do some one-to-one coaching, but I do in-person coaching as well in Salisbury. I also really want to start bringing nature into my coaching sessions. So if you're the kind of person that likes to walk and talk, if you love being in woodland, if you know that you need to move in order to be able to process, then I'd be really curious about doing more of that kind of work. And that's definitely on the cards for 2026. I'm just doing a massive planning piece at the moment for next year. I'm also hoping to do a retreat for neurodivergent, well, especially autistic ADHDers actually next year, a weekend retreat where we're going to do lots of wonderful kind of group coaching stuff, but we need some space to play as well. I might get the hammocks out and get some fun stuff happening in the woods as well. Get outside, get the fire lit. So there's lots coming in 2026, but they're the main places that you can find me, as well as on Instagram too.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So if there's been anything that has triggered anyone in this episode, then please make sure you reach out to somebody. You can find me at Riding the Trauma Train on most social media platforms, and I will put lots and lots of information in the show notes. Thank you so much, Emily, for being here today. I appreciate you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me today on Riding the Trauma Train. I'm Lydia, and I feel privileged to share this space with you. No matter where you are on this train right now, whether it's in survival mode, slowly finding your feet in recovery, or maybe it's somewhere in between, remember, you are not alone in what you're feeling, and you do not have to travel this journey by yourself. So if you'd like to continue traveling together, please follow Riding the Trauma Train wherever you're listening, so you can join us at the next stop. Until next time, take care.